Well, here we go. I appreciate your attendance to this Ignite stage and preferring this to the opening session of the global platform. An Ignite stage, this is where we are actually working globally day by day. We are working with the global ignitions, with the global landscape fires. This is our theme at the Global Fire Monitoring Center, which I am representing. And today I want to talk about the complexity of interactions at landscape level globally, and I will a little bit focus on experiences here in Europe. So what is the key issue here in Europe is that our landscapes are changing in many regions, especially because of the rural exodus, the urbanization, and the abandonment of traditional land cultivation. And this has a lot of implications on the, if you wish, on the wildfire risk, on the flammability of our landscapes. And we have seen a number of major conflagrations that occurred. But let me give you an example how our landscapes are changing. And this is a photograph taken in Spain in 1950. And have a look to the very same scene a couple of years later. So if we would have had satellites in the early 1950s, these satellites would not have seen any fire because, I'm going back, there was nothing to burn. Because this land had been cultivated so intensively, every stick of woody material has been used for cooking and heating, and the goat and the sheep and the agriculture and so on. And here an example from the Western Balkans, where the former pasture lands are now abandoned. They're becoming overgrown by forest, which is nice from the point of view of sequestering carbon. It is, of course, welcome to have more trees, but the former fragmentation of our landscapes got lost. And we can see that, and this is a scene from Greece, where the landscape that formerly has been very intensively cultivated by olive groves is now becoming flammable. And this is not only due to climate change. We have seen that climate change have brought a lot of changes in drought regimes, in the duration and the severity of droughts, which has a lot of implications on the flammability of our landscapes. But we can also see that increasingly these fires are entering the peri-urban areas, the villages, the farmsteads. So this scene here is from Greece, not from last year, but a couple of years ago, where the fires were burning into the suburbs of Athens. And tragically, last year, this happened in Mati on the 23rd of July, when a fire within a couple of hours entered this suburb and left behind 100 people killed, more than 90 immediately, and the remaining about 10 people passing away later due to the injuries. So it means also that the vulnerability of the peri-urban area, of the residential areas, we sometimes call it the so-called wildland-urban interface, is becoming more vulnerable to fire. And even structures that are built quite fire resilient have been affected. But it is not only the case in the Euro-Mediterranean area or in Eastern, Southeastern Europe. If we are looking to the Russian Federation, for instance, the rural exodus is extreme. Every year, hundreds to thousands of villages are becoming abandoned. And with abandonment, the people are urbanizing. They are leaving the landscape. And this is a drone imagery of 3 weeks ago, in the Transbaikal region in Chita Oblast, where within a couple of days, 10,000 of cattle were burned almost 1,000 families became homeless because of these fires. Now, the fires do not know borders. So they are affecting all types of landscape elements. Natural ecosystems, agriculture and pasture lands, we talked about it, the farms, infrastructures, and sometimes even waste deposits, contaminated areas. And we could see in the fires in California last year and also last year in Greece that the materials that have been burning in the residential areas are very toxic and very dangerous to human health. And here comes the point that the sectoral responsibilities of the agencies concerned with all these different elements of the landscapes are very complex. So we are not talking to one single agency, usually in all the countries of the world. We are talking to almost half a dozen to a dozen agencies and sectoral responsibilities that are often not coordinated, harmonized, and so on. And we have predominantly in the agricultural lands, in the lands that are not urban areas or settlements are not forests, there's hardly any agency taking care of this. So there is a vacuum. And we do have transboundary impacts of fire. Fires are crossing borders. Smoke pollution of fires is affecting neighboring countries or the global atmosphere. So we are also talking about multilateral agreements, conventions that are addressing the question of emissions that are threatening the environment or human health. Let me just give you one example of agricultural burning, which is very common, and especially in Eastern Europe. And here you see a satellite composite map. And these agricultural burnings are taking place at a time of the year when there is a predominant wind transport from the south to the Arctic. So the emissions coming from these burnings are affecting the Arctic environment. The soot, or the so-called black carbon, is deposited on the ice and on the snow, and this is an accelerator of ice and snow melting because of the change of albedo. So what to do? There are numerous examples where our community, our Global Fire Monitoring Center, has been asked by government to support strategic planning, future-oriented management plans. And this is why the government of Greece called us and asked us to develop a forward-looking study, not looking back, not trying to accuse or to blame anybody who was responsible for the past, but looking to the changing conditions, the changing environmental and socio-economic conditions in the future. So we developed the report, and we came up with, for the case of Greece, with a proposal. You would maybe say, what, another agency, another one? No, it's a coordinating mechanism first. In a country where there are established agencies and mandates that you do not want to remove, but that you want to better coordinate. And several principles of this approach have been manifested in this strategic plan. And they are listed here. It has to do, first, of course, with the transdisciplinarity. If we are using the best science to address the landscape fire issues. And it has to do with a holistic policy that takes into account the complexity of the different landscapes elements and the responsible agency. And it has to do with coherence and with a cohesive approach that is mandatory for all the players. And in the end, in this approach, the element of community involvement, of community-based fire management, as we call it, is very essential. And yesterday at the stakeholder forum, there was a talk about the human rights for instance, for alternative energy. And my proposal was to go a step beyond, to talk about human obligations or human duties. Because civil society must become an integral part of landscape management. There is no agency in the world that can do it for people. The people, the landowners, the farmers, the people living in the interface between the vegetated lands and the residential or urban areas, they have to take responsibility. They have to take the issue in their own hands. And only then we can overcome this problem. In other words, inclusion of civil society in landscape management is not really what should be voluntary in one way and the other. It should become a part of our culture. It's a part of the culture where we have to give responsibility to ourselves, to the civil society. It's like energy saving, you know. Every individual has to be part of it. And this is what we need to discuss in the future when we are going to address similar issues in countries that are facing similar problems like Greece, Portugal, the United States, and others. Thank you very much. I'm happy if you have a question to reply. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from India. My name is Johann. I think I belong to Wetlands International, and we work across a lot of mountain landscapes where forest fires are reality, and as you rightly said, community-based organizations and civil societies play an integral role. But I think depleting water resources, especially groundwater resources, I mean, we need to also look at, when we talk about green recovery, how do we enhance that? How do we look at, and specifically where, monitoring is not as extensive as, in parts of Europe, how do we monitor?
It is absolutely true. It is within the scope of what we call integrated landscape fire management. Fire is one factor. If we are looking at landscape level and the interconnectedness of landscape elements, we see, for instance, that floods, extreme precipitation. Extreme precipitation is the other extreme. We are dealing with drought, but extreme precipitation, floods, flash floods are also influenced by land management. And looking at ecological solutions, for instance, the Partnership for Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction under the UN, where we are working with, is an example where this partnership is looking at this integrated approach. And we could see, like in your country, that, for instance, in Germany, we suffered by the way, our center is based in Germany, where we had an enormous rainfall deficit last year. And by early this year, most of Germany has not yet recovered from it. So only a few days and weeks of drought are now enough to increase the wildfire risk enormously. So I think we need to look at this integrated approach of both. Thank you.
Excuse me, are there alternatives to the agricultural burning?
Yes, absolutely. One of the reasons why in Eastern Europe, in the South Caucasus and Central Asia, agricultural burning is applied because it's the cheapest method. But the organic matter that is burned should belong into the soil and to stay there as humus, as soil enrichment, as carbon storage and fertilizer. So the method of, let me say, the economically disadvantaged farmers who do not have the money to either plow or to use organic farming, this is simply burning, and we need to offer these alternatives. And this is exactly part of this integrated approach. So we are not necessarily talking, if we are talking about fire prevention, don't throw away your cigarette or whatever. This is marginal, you know. Most important is land management, sustainable land management. Thank you.
Sorry, a very quick. I'm also working for Wetlands International. We look a lot at peatlands management. When these are degraded mainly, in Indonesia, Malaysia, there's a lot of peat fire happening. Same in around Moscow in I think 20. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So do you also look at that specific ecosystem, the peatlands, the degradation and that enhancement of peat fires?
Let me put it the other way. Tomorrow is the Sasakawa Award ceremony. We had nominated, but it was not accepted in the election process, somebody from Indonesia who is dealing with re-wetting, restoration of wetlands, which, by the way, you mentioned Russia, is a major program now. I think there's a change of paradigms at the moment, that the former activities of converting peatlands as a source of energy or source of plantations and so on, that has changed in many countries. And Russia and Indonesia are making a huge progress. But still we have many areas that are largely uninhabited, like in central northern Siberia, where no people are living. And here we see the impact of climate drying, climate change. It's a major issue because in the peatlands we have a very large amount of the terrestrial carbon. And if this carbon is getting lost, we will have a problem because it's going to the atmosphere and accelerate the greenhouse effect enormously.
And the second, you can catch the bird with 2 stones because one, you keep the carbon sequestered, and secondly, you prevent the fires if you re-wet.
Yes, and we maintain biodiversity, the treasure of biodiversity, and many things, you know. The functioning of these ecosystems are vital for the planet. And for us, fire is, of course, the most visible element, you know. But as I hope I could bring this message that we are not just looking to the fire itself. It's not a question of buying aircraft and putting out fires. No, it's a question of sustainable land management. Thank you.